Well, thank you very much, Dr. Van Dixhoorn. We have a few. Start with simpler ones. At least I think are simpler ones. Could you recommend one or two study guides on the catechisms?
Yes, I can. My favorite is Thomas Watson's 3-volume. I mean, like, oh, 3 volumes. How is that helpful? It really is great. Thomas Watson is a Puritan. He writes 3 books: the Body of Divinity, the 10 Commandments, and the Lord's Prayer, because that's the 3 sections of the Catechism. They're filled with illustrations, scriptural supports. I think his mother taught him that it's not proper grammar to have a sentence without some kind of metaphor or illustration in it. Very colorful. Of course, it's older English. You kind of got to work at it. Not all the illustrations work anymore, but most of them do. It's very refreshing, helpful tool. And I was asked to do a couple. That's 3 volumes, so I'm kind of cheating. But the other one, G.I. Williamson has a wonderful study of the Shorter Catechism. So I recommend that as well.
What do you think of Thomas Vincent?
I think Thomas Vincent is good, but if we're going to go Puritan, I go Watson.
Okay, all right. The question about proof texts.
Yes.
Sometimes you're going through the confession or catechisms, and you go, "How in the world did they get there from here?"
Yeah.
Can you comment on that?
I will.
Okay,
yes.
Thanks.
So when the Westminster Assembly is talking about God, one of the things that they do is they talk about the knowledge of God. What does God know? Does God know the past? Of course he does. Does he know the future? Yes, of course he does. Can God know hypotheticals? Can God know what would happen if something happened that actually doesn't happen? And the Westminster Divines provide they provide a proof text. They offer, as I recall, oh boy, do I recall, is it, 1 Samuel 23. And there Saul is chasing David, and David runs into the city of Keilah. Mm-hmm. And there David prays, Lord, if Saul comes to Keilah, well, the people of Keilah, whom I've just delivered, by the way, will they give me up? And the Lord says, not. I'm sorry, it's a hypothetical situation. He doesn't say, well, I know that that's going to happen, so I can tell you the future. No, he says to David, if you stay and Saul comes, then they will do that. And so David leaves. So what has the Lord just done? He has demonstrated that he knows all possible worlds. He knows what would happen in an alternative universe where David would stay, Saul would come, they would get him up. That doesn't happen, but God knows what would happen if that did happen. Do you see? Now, when you're reading the confession and it just says, 1 Samuel 23 on earth, 1 Samuel 23, you've got to noodle on it. You've got to think about the passages. And almost all of them are really useful. In my little book, Confessing the Faith, I actually try and explain each chapter using the proof text used by the Westminster Divines, rather than the ones that the OPC provides, in order, because they've changed some of them, in order to try and illustrate the usefulness, and to kind of explain the meaning of these passages and the doctrines that are talked about. I think the proof texts are really helpful. And actually, the Westminster Divines didn't want to have them in there. They said, we're going to have to explain why they're there, and that makes for a really thick book, and that's just too hard. And the 39 articles don't have proof text. Please don't make us do it. And Parliament said, do it. I'm so glad that Westminster simply lost that from them. Yeah.
I was going to make a movie reference, but then I remembered for the last 2 days it'll be lost on you, so I'm not going to.
Lost on me.
Yeah. How much influence did the Scottish representatives have in the final product?
Yeah, right. So, how much influence did the Scottish members have? Well, they were involved in different committees. They could never vote, but they could be present. Their involvement is not greater than the involvement of the leading English theologians. And some of the just wonderful legends aren't true. George Gillespie does not stand up before the Shorter Catechism is written, and offer a prayer that kind of encompasses whole questions and answers of the catechism, which people frantically write down, and there they are. It just doesn't happen. One of the Scots, a guy named Robert Bailey, it makes it sound as if, the English are just helpless. But thankfully, a team of elite Scotsmen are kind of dropped into Westminster, and each with their own specialties, and they sort everything out. I'm thankful they were there. George Gillespie's the best debater of the Westminster Assembly, but they are probably sort of less involved than the most involved, and more involved than the least involved. They're kind of in the middle of the pack.
All right. Were pastoral home visitations part of the vision of pastoral care proposed by the Westminster Divines? If so or not, do you think they are relevant today?
Yeah. Yes. So they regular home visitation, I believe, was the practice of most members of the Westminster Assembly. I was at the University of Cambridge 2 weeks ago looking at a little tiny book of sermons written by one of the Westminster Divines. He wrote with this sort of impossibly, obnoxiously small hand. In the back, you see a list of the names of the people in his congregation with little marks. I'm sure they indicate sort of his sort of circuit of visitation. It's very common. But does the Westminster Assembly insist that every minister do it? No. Should we do it today? Yes. It's extremely important.
So there's a second part to that. Are there alternative ways that pastors and elders can engage in that kind of care without necessarily visiting their congregants' homes?
Yes, and the way that was normally done, the way that was normally done was the Richard Baxter way. Richard Baxter would not actually always visit people, even though he was legendary in his pastoral care, but he would not always visit people. He would basically have office hours and expect people to come to him. And that way he could process a huge number of people. And other ministers did this as well. They would be in the manse, in their homes, and they would just line up people who had to come and visit them, whole families, and they would kind of wait, take their turn, and so on. So, and I've done something like that sometimes. The gold standard is always visiting someone in their home, if possible, because you learn so much about them. And I think people are often more comfortable in their own home. You can pray for them. And see how to pray for them in ways that are better. But they did not insist on it.
All right. Next one will require some definition on your part. But can a theonomist be in full agreement with the Westminster Confession of Faith? So first, in 30 seconds, define what a theonomist is.
So if I'm given so few seconds, a theonomist is someone who wishes to not only uphold the moral law of the Old Testament, but also the judicial laws of the Old Testament, although applied differently today, those laws, the judicial laws, are still upheld. Can someone uphold the Westminster Standards? Well, I think they need to take an exception to the insistence in the standards that the judicial laws have expired along with the state of Israel. I think too much work needs to be done. Can someone take that exception and still minister faithfully? I think that's up to the presbytery to determine. There are theonomists and theonomists. Sort of like theonomists, very more heavily systematic theonomists. So leave that up to the presbyteries.
All right. What did church discipline practically look like after someone was excommunicated? Was it just a fencing of the table for that person, or was it more than this?
So what did discipline look like? That's an almost impossible question to answer, because that's sort of like, that's basically social history. Which is good, but doing theological history or the history of theology, we can look at what the rules of the church were, how they were developed, but seeing how they were implemented in a given church, that's really hard to see, because we don't usually have the stories of people in the congregation. The stories were written mostly by the leaders. We do it only if someone complains about something done badly, do we ever have a record of something. What we do know is excommunication was exceedingly rare amongst the Presbyterians during the 1640s and 50s. And I know one historian who's looked into it for a while. I think he says he's not yet found a single case of excommunication. But suspension was much more common.
All right. This questioner says, John Owen and Thomas Watson were not members of the Westminster Assembly. Could you comment on their relationship, if any, with the Assembly?
Yeah, so John Owen was friends, a great 17th century theologian, a Congregationalist. He was friends with members of the Westminster Assembly, and he revised the Westminster Assembly's work along with a team of others, creating what's called the Savoy Declaration, which was then later revised even further by Reformed Baptists and used by them. So a friend, Thomas Watson, was too young to be at the Westminster Assembly, and he and Thomas Manton and others were promoters of the Assembly's work, but they were just London Presbyterians who became friends with members of the Assembly.
All right. I'll try this next one. I'm not sure that I understand, but you're a greater mind than mine, so you might understand this question. Okay.
I don't accept that premise, but I will.
Is it fair to say that those who argue for Presbyterianism from Scripture do so almost by process of elimination? I'll start.
Oh, yeah. So I think the answer to that is no. It's not like, well, Congregationalism doesn't work, Episcopalianism doesn't work. I guess we're stuck with Presbyterianism.
Okay, that was the next part what he said.
Okay.
So you already said no to the next part too, so good. Keep on going.
I'm saying no a lot, I guess.
Yes. And if Presbyterianism is the most scriptural, where are the guidelines for what a presbytery is to handle found? Is it mainly a matter of prudence, good and necessary consequences, tradition?
Yeah, so I think the best example that we have, best examples are from Acts 6 and Acts 15. And the one, the leaders of the church gather together and they deal with a practical problem. Basically, a local church could not solve its own problems. And so they come together and they solve the practical problem collectively. The second time, you have a doctrinal problem. The local church cannot solve the doctrinal problem by itself, and therefore the work is done collectively. Unfortunately, with the Congregationalist approach, you have the sort of personal approach. You can try and reason out an issue, but if you can't solve that problem, someone has to leave. There's no process of appeal. And if a whole church is erring, there's no way for anyone to help the whole church other than what Congregationalists do, which is to disassociate themselves from the church. So you just only have a nuclear option. There's nothing kind of below that.
Okay. This is our last one.
Okay.
You talked a lot about the examination of men who sought to be ordained ministers. Did the Assembly have anything to say about examining men who would serve as ruling elders?
Yes. Good question. But no is actually what I need to say. No, they don't have anything to say about examining ruling elders. So what was done with ruling elders? That's kind of a realm of social history again. The best study of this came out, I think, in December of last year. It's a book by Elliot Vernon. I think it's called London Presbyterianism, or something like that. And it tries to kind of answer some of these questions, but you can see from that work how hard it is. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.